Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be focusing on the best chords to follow chord 7 when you're working in a minor key. Now, chord 7 is one of those chords that causes people to freak out, mainly because it's a diminished chord. So when we're working in minor keys and we're talking about chords, harmony, well, I'm using the harmonic minor scale as the reference point here. The clue's in the title a bit, because if it's a harmonic minor, then it's essentially about harmony, about chords. When you're writing melodies, well then possibly you're thinking more about the melodic minor. And then of course when you put the whole thing together, well those two things have to adjust to each other a bit, otherwise you sometimes get some nasty clashes. I'm also accepting that you might want to work in natural minor, in which case that's going to just change the landscape a little bit. However, for now, if we can focus on the harmonic minor, that's going to be the kind of default position for most people. So chord 7 in the harmonic minor scale is a diminished chord, as is chord 2. So if I'm in C minor, let's just work through what this all means. So here's the scale of C minor: C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B, C. Harmonic minor. So if I put my chords together, I'm taking each note of the scale, and above it I'm putting a third and a fifth, but I'm following the notes for the key. So chord 1 is C, E flat, G. And that's a minor chord. Chord 2, D, F, A flat, that's a diminished chord. Chord 3, E flat, G, B, and that's an augmented chord. Chord 4, F, A flat, C, so that's minor. Chord 5, G, B, D, that's major. Chord 6, A flat, C, E flat, that's major. Chord 7, B, D, F, that's diminished. Okay, as you I'm sure know, when we're talking about chords, we use Roman numerals, so we don't get confused with numbers that might be fingering or telling us about triplets or bar numbers or anything else. So once we've got Roman numerals, we know we're dealing with chords. Okay, let's also talk about inversions for just a moment. If I take chord 7 and the bottom note is in the bass, so say I just put that B in the bass, then it's in root position. If the middle note, D in this case, is in the bass, it's in what we call first inversion. And if the top note, F in this case, is in the bass, we say it's in second inversion. So in one system, we simply use letters A, B, C. So root position, this would be 7A. First inversion, this would be 7B, and second inversion, this would be 7C. When we're in A, there are more A's than anything else, so we tend not to use the A. We just call it chord 7 and assume you mean A. But if it's in first inversion, we call it 7B. Second inversion, call it 7C. Now, you may have been brought up on a slightly different tradition in which we call this chord 7, but instead of calling it A, we call it 5-3. And again, because that happens more than any other position, we tend not to bother with a 5-3, we just abbreviate it to nothing. First inversion in this other system will be called 7-6-3, and the 6-3 will be abbreviated to 6. And the second inversion will be 6-4, and we would write that in full. So on the board, I'm using the ABC method. But if you're used to the other method, every time you see a B, think of it as a 6 and you can't go wrong. Because you'll notice that in each of these examples, I'm talking about using chord 7 in first inversion. Now, why is that? Well, when we take chord 7 and we put B at the bottom, the root at the bottom of the chord, there's something about that chord that not everybody likes. You might think it's the most groovy chord on the planet. That's great. Use it as much as you want to. It has its purpose, no doubt about it. But some people find there's a slight disturbance about what we call the tritone, the diminished fifth between the bottom and the top of the chord. Some people find that a slightly awkward sound, slightly ugly sound. But if we put it in first inversion, then we kind of hide that. So the bottom and the top now sounds a little bit easier on the ear. So we kind of hide that awkward interval by making it happen between, say, the top note and one of the middle notes, or between two of the middle notes. It's when it happens between the top and the bottom that it's a bit more stark on the ear. So you can use it in root position whenever you want to, but most composers over the years, when they have used chord 7, they've used it in first inversion. So what I'm talking about here is, well, if we decide to use it and use it in first inversion, what would be the best thing to do after it? Because that's the thing that I find hooks most people up. So lots of books advising people, avoid chord 7, it's awkward, best avoided, you've got other chords to choose from. That always seems to me to be a bit of a pity. But in fact, the great thing is to know, well, where can I go from chord 7 that will make kind of musical sense? And then you can feel more confident using it. So here's the first option. We go from 7B, 7 in first inversion, to 1. Let's have a think about what that sounds like. So in C minor, it goes like this. Now you can hear that that sounds like quite a good progression. You notice all these parts are moving by step, which is kind of quite smooth, isn't it? And what we call voice leading, kind of where do each of these notes want to go? You can hear B at the top going to C, F in the middle going to E flat, D in the bass going to C. So they're all going by step, and it's kind of quite good voice leading. They all feel as if that's where the individual parts want to go. So 7B followed by 1 is always a strong thing to do. You could, of course, decide to go from 7B to 1B. So 7 in first inversion to 1 in first inversion. That's a slight variation on what we've just done. So I'm going 7 in first inversion, 1 in first inversion. That sounds all right as well, doesn't it? And you might proceed from there somewhere else, 7 in first inversion, 1B, 4, 5, or 7 in first inversion, 1 in first inversion, 4, 5, 1, or 4, 5, 6 you could go to. I mean, there are lots of places you could move on to from there. So really those first two options are quite strong. The third option might take you by surprise, because in the harmonic minor, we've talked about 7 being one of the two chords that's diminished, but we've also touched on 3, which in the harmonic minor is an augmented chord. So people are even more wary of that. It's kind of like, ooh, augmented chord sounds like that stuff you get in horror films, doesn't it? When you get this kind of stuff, it's a bit terrifying. But actually, why should we always avoid chord 3, which is another thing that you see written in some books? Always avoid chord 3 in minor keys, like it's going to get you or something. Well, it's all about how you use it. So here we've got a progression where we go from 7 in first inversion to 3. So that's slightly unusual, I'd say. It's a less common progression, but what's good about it is, again, you've got one note in common between the two chords. So any common notes always smooth out a chord progression, and the other two notes are going by step. F to G, D to E. And then what would you do after that? Well, you could do that 7 in first inversion, 3, come back to the 7 in first inversion, and then go on to 1. So you see how that kind of works quite nicely, doesn't it? Especially if you had repeated Bs there, where you were thinking, oh, I've got 3 Bs, what am I going to do with them? Well, this is a way to get a chord change in there. So, that's a possibility. I mean, you could go from 7 in first inversion to 3 in first inversion. That would be possible. It's kind of like, well, where are you going to go from there? Slightly awkward, but you could maybe go on to something like a 5-7 in its last inversion, and then on to 1 in its first inversion. So there are possibilities to go on to 3 in first inversion as well. Okay, and what about this one, where we go from 7 in first inversion to 5 or to 5, 7? Well, here's 7 in first inversion going to 5. And that's quite a smooth progression, isn't it? Particularly with that repeated B between the chords. So what we call a common note between two chords always kind of binds them together a bit. Or you could go from the 7 in first inversion to a 5, 7, a dominant seventh. And that's quite a handy thing to do because of this. Chord 7 in C minor is B, D, F. If I stick a G underneath that, I've now got a 5, 7. So in fact, chord 7 is very close to 5, 7. Just the addition of a note and you're there. So sometimes they're interchangeable. Sometimes you might think, oh, I've used 5, 7 so many times. Oh, maybe I could use 7, particularly in its first inversion, or the other way around. But what about going from 7B and then saying, well, why don't I just make that 5, 7, and then I can go on to chord 1, or 5, 7, and on to chord 6. So you see, there are actually more possibilities for using chord 7 than a lot of people might realize. Then you might be wondering what all this is about, the replacement passing 6/4. Well, we've already talked about 6/4 meaning second inversion. So this is one of the ways in which you can use what's called a passing 6/4. Sticking in C minor, if I go chord 1 and then 5 in second inversion, so that's 5C or 5, 6, 4, and then 1 in first inversion. So I've got 1, then I've got 5 in second inversion, then I've got 1 in first inversion. Or I can do it the other way around. So 1 in first inversion, 5 in second inversion, 1 in root position. That 5 in second inversion is called a passing 6/4. Why am I using the word replacement? Well, instead of using that 5 in second inversion, you can use 7B. We were talking about the relationship between 7 and 5 a moment ago. So they're quite interchangeable if you want to replace this in what started life as a passing 6/4. So we go chord 1, 7 in first inversion to 1 in first inversion, or we go the other way around. 1 in first inversion, 7 in first inversion, chord 1. And it's actually a very nice way to use that chord 7 in first inversion. So really this video is a little bit of a campaign on behalf of chord 7. And just to say, don't be frightened of it, don't shy away from it, just be a bit careful how you use it, where you use it. But these are giving you some options that would be pretty safe ones. I'd say option 3 is kind of less likely than the other options, but it doesn't mean to say you shouldn't use it. I'm just trying to extend beyond the obvious. So there are other things that you might want to try playing with. And there's something quite attractive as well about playing with a diminished chord alongside an augmented chord. So you might enjoy doing something with that. So hopefully that will just give you a bit of confidence in using chord 7 in minor keys. And if you've enjoyed this video, well, you might want to find out more. In which case, go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. You'll find out all about our online courses there. You'll be able to read blogs, all sorts of other stuff. So lots of courses that would go into much more detail in this kind of way. And while the YouTube videos are all one-offs, our courses are kind of progressive, so they take you through a progressive path of study and enable you to go through the detail in a sensible way, a sensible order, and so the whole thing kind of connects properly. So that might be something that interests you. While you're on the homepage on the website, click on Maestros and see what that's got to offer you. Fun things, badges, emojis, behind the scenes material, all that kind of thing, but also access to discounts on our courses. And probably the flagship thing is the fact we have a couple of monthly live streams. And in the first of those live streams, there's a kind of solid hour of teaching from me, where we can go into much more detail on the work of a composer, or analysing some music, or doing some harmony, composing, all sorts of different things we can do there. And we run a live chat through the whole thing, so you can ask questions, share ideas with other people, so it's kind of quite interactive in that regard. Then we have another live stream where, if you wish to, you can submit your own compositions, arrangements, harmony exercises, recordings of your own performances, anything on which you would value personal evaluation. So I'll give you individual feedback on whatever it is you want to submit, and we just share that in the group. So again, the live chat's open, people can comment, and we all learn from each other. And it's a very supportive community, with lots of people telling us that they found their musical journey sometimes to be a bit of a lonely trail, and actually sharing it with other people dealing with the same kind of successes and challenges is really supportive and something they value a great deal. And we do all really learn so much from each other. Anyway, if it's for you, there it is, Maestros.